is Lori Power. I'm a group benefit consultant. And my business is benefits. What I want to do ultimately is I want to align the customer experience with the employee experience and make sure that we're getting the right benefits in place for your people that are the engine behind your business. In doing that, I want to talk to people who are in the know. I want to talk to experts like on policy. I want to talk to experts on hiring and recruiting and staffing and culture people like Natasha and accountants like Garnet. So I really appreciate everybody coming in and joining in the conversation. So we're going to get started. We're going to put a challenge out there that we, as we work with the humans in the world, to remove the back out of the dialogue. That's where I'm going to get started today. When we put that back in our dialogue, we will automatically put a stall barrier to culture and moving forward into success. Take me through, Stephanie, what's a typical hiring practice?
A typical hiring practice, I think, to be totally honest, it's all relative to the business, the industry, the expertise that lives within an organization. But if we were to take kind of like a high level view of the hiring practice, it really is everything from identifying that there is a vacancy or soon to be a vacancy to preparing the role design potentially to posting and sourcing and really potentially internally bringing in new talent or replacing a role. And that hiring practice, it can be, simple with a lot of issues, or it can be very kind of robust and deep with a lot of intricacies and connection to the now, the future progression plan, and the vision of the business. So when we say what is a typical hiring practice, it obviously would be the practice of bringing someone new into a business. And it might stop there for many companies, but the typical hiring practice should also involve, where are we going? Where are we hoping this person will go? And so I think where a lot of individuals want to hope, or maybe owners want to hope, it's right here. It's a continuum. It's an evolution. It is an ongoing living plan. And so I would say I'd love that to become the typical, like that's our work. And Julianna, you're nodding because these are people. And so there's nothing typical about, one person versus another. We're all kind of atypical and unique. So it's like, it's a journey. I really think it's a journey.
What's one problem do you see, Julianna, when people are relying on what might be a templated hiring policy?
That's a great question, because if the job has fundamentally changed 20% or more, you want to revisit it and you want to look at the job. Like, I don't know if you need to do a full job analysis. I'm looking around the table. Almost everybody's an HR professional, except for Garnet. But Garnet, you get HR. So, and you often oversee HR, right? So instead of talking to you as business owners, it's talking to you as professionals who have to influence your business owners and decision makers. So taking a look at the job, has it changed? Also, if you've done any exit interviews, why do people leave? And the other thing that we've always recommended, if it's onerous, is like some best practices around how many do you shortlist. I have some clients who shortlisted down to 10. Oh my gosh. And then they start to do some screening. Well, to me, if you're having busy managers that you're paying full salaries to, doing 10 interviews and then maybe a second interview, could you do some pre-screening? And nowadays with Zoom and MS Teams and video screening, I think you save a lot of time. So number one, has the job fundamentally changed, and why are people not staying? Is it a boss issue? Is it the job is not what was advertised? Like, a realistic job preview is super important for anybody who's currently working and thinking about changing. What are they actually committing to? Yeah.
I like what you've said about when somebody leaves. So let's assume for a moment that we have hired in a particular position and we've done the prep to say, this is what we're hiring for. These are the dynamics that we need that person to come to the table. but yet you keep churning that position. Is that not the indicator on, let's go back? If we've hired using this criteria, but we're not able to sustain them, we're not able to retain them, how do we work that back into the formula for hiring?
I always cringe when I hear in smaller to mid-sized organizations when HR is doing the exit interviews, because it can really be great if HR is doing the exit interviews and you're seen as third party, neutral, objective. But if there's any kind of perception like, oh, HR is doing it, I always wonder what kind of data we're getting from that. Actually, I should ask, how many of you do exit interviews? Is that a practice, Jan? Yeah. Natasha?
Yeah, the biggest thing that I'm finding with the exit interview portion of it is I've got enough creed on the floor that they'll talk to me, but they don't want me passing the information on. And a lot of that has to do with the culture that we've got here. So that's the biggest issue I have.
You know, that's a great segue, Jan, about working in the culture to that hiring and retention practice. I know when Natasha and I were speaking, when we were talking, and she's like, well, her job, and I'm going to paraphrase, her job is to create mini advertisers for the company, right? Who will help with that recruitment process.
Culture ambassadors, that's what I call them.
Yeah. Culture ambassadors. What can we do, Stephanie, to make that hiring process, before we get into the retention, what can we do to make that stronger with all the tools at our fingertips? What can we do to improve that process?
You know, I think that's it. Well, so first off, I think that's a great question. I think it's a bit of twofold. It's a bit of a grassroots gather. And so when you go into a hiring process, if there's been turnover multiple times and you haven't been able to put your finger on the pulse as to why, my thoughts are, sometimes it's not what people are saying. It's what people are not saying. It's what people are afraid to say. It's what's not being told to you at the exit interview, because that person is already disengaged. They're already moving forward. They are 1 foot, 2 feet out the door. So I think that prior to the hiring process, it's looking at your long-termers, those that have, courageous communication, that are, like Natasha was saying, your ambassadors, your brand ambassadors. They care enough about the business to put their neck out there to tell you something that is in the best interest of the business, even whether it is hard. They're not your employees that tell you what they think you want to hear. They're your employees that courageously tell you because they're truly invested, right? They are invested in the business. They are open to conflict. In the words of Ray Dalio, like, radical candor is not easy for people to have. So if there's 360 reviews happening or employee appraisals happening where they can self-evaluate, it's taking that feedback truly obviously above the position and below too, to understand like what is happening from a multidisciplinary standpoint around that position. What are we hearing? What are we not hearing? What do we still need to investigate? And then I think that when you're looking at hiring, a mind shift that needs to happen for companies is not always about who's the best person we can get. Yes, absolutely. That's great. That's great. Who's got the core competencies, but who carries risk that when mixed with our culture, those risks will outweigh the benefits and we may lose that individual. And if we're not committed to addressing the risks that they bring, supporting them in the environment that they need with the risk factors they bring, with the risk factors we know we have that potentially culturally we haven't been able to fix yet, or we've got to journey towards fixing, and the limitations perhaps through resources, there's pros and cons. And typically we don't, when we're looking to hire, we get all excited. It's like dating. It's like, oh, I really like them. And yeah, they play hockey too. And my kids play hockey. But there's all these risk factors that we don't think about that are little ingredients to success. And so we need to make sure that we're aware of them, we're being realistic, and then create a plan forward. And we need to do that. What I say to what Julianna brought up is like that short list of 10, that's not a short list. And it's unrealistic to have managers that are wearing multiple hats. Take that search that could be a full week of your time and move it fast enough so that you have the first right of refusal of the best candidates. You'll lose half of them. So I think it's about, it's a little bit about, sort of like the postmortem, the 360, and then the go forward plan. So reverse engineering it very tightly to ensure that you can commit that time to the hiring and truly assess what needs to be in there. I think that sometimes we've created this idea that hiring should be really easy and really quick and just kind of like you can float it on the side of your desk. And when we talk to HR professionals and practitioners, they are like, hiring is huge. And it really is. And I think that if I could give more credit to HR professionals for all the hats they wear, all the hats we wear, I mean, it's massive. And you're dealing with human lives. Like you're dealing with someone who is potentially leaving a role where they work really hard to support their family, and they're coming into your environment. And so you've got a human life you're dealing with, and everything that goes along with that they support and their bucket, so to speak. And so I think that there's a lot more credit that is due to HR practitioners because it's a big job and it's important. So
now, if I'm understanding and if I'm looking at it from an outsider's perspective, because I'm not in HR, and I'm looking at it to say, what I'm hearing from you is not to put so much onus on the exiting person, because let's face it, if they were engaged and they were invested in the company and they were part of that culture, it's unlikely that they would be leaving anyway. But how much emphasis can we pull in, like you said, from above and from below, and perhaps in that parallel to them plan out that position a little bit better? Which leaves me to ask you, Julianne, what is the cost of employee turnover? What boggles my imagination all the time is, and Murray and I've talked about this a lot, is people's flippancy to turnover. Like I said, I had a conversation this morning, was talking about that, and it was just expected that we're going to have this kind of turnover. What's the ultimate cost, dollars, cents, credibility, culture, to an organization, Julianna?
Yeah, so it depends what surveys and research you look at. I've seen everything in Alberta being $30,000 is the average cost per employee turnover. And I've also seen stats that go anywhere from half the employee's salary up to 3 times the employee's salary. The higher up you go, so if you have a COO or a VP position, it costs more, right? Because of and those are the hard costs for people's time and energy, the advertising costs and so on, but it doesn't factor in reputation and branding and all that. So it can be like a $50,000 a year employee can be 25 grand up to, hundreds of thousands, depending on how they exit and all the other. So it is like, to me, it's a bottom line obvious, but it's also the headaches. It's somebody else is picking up that slack, and your high performing engaged employees are at risk of burnout if that's not addressed. And I'm preaching to the choir. I think everybody around this table knows that it's expensive. But yeah, if you I was just on a walk with an HR buddy, a training buddy of mine, and he's not happy where he's at, and lots of people are looking around. And he said in his organization, they have 35% turnover. And I said, oh, and they're not concerned about that? And he said, no, they're not. And this is a global organization. And I said, well, what's your industry standard? Because in the call center, when I worked at TELUS, call centers, 33% is industry standard. For every 3 employees, one's not going to make it. So he said, yeah, it's double digits is our industry standard, but it's not in the 30%. And so why they're not taking a look at it is probably because they're just coping with so many other things, and that's a proactive piece, and they're just busy reacting.
Well, and Natasha pulls up a good point here. It has the impact on the existing staff, right? Like mentally, if we look at mental health issues in Canada right now, they're ranking up there on that 68th percentile for hierarchy on employee needs. So, what's that doing to the staff and pulling in that culture? What do we do to change the mindset on the hiring practices, Stephanie?
I think that A couple things. It really is somewhat industry dependent, because some industries are really going to struggle with turnover, and if they're project based, it is really hard for them at times for their labor force to engage and incent and continue to keep everyone on payroll. So there's little traditional, kind of issues, certain markets. But I think that having a standard operating procedure that is consistent and persistent across hiring efforts to ensure that you're maximizing internal controls to increase outputs that are successful, and you can move it quickly, but in a targeted, thorough fashion, is one way to help your team to be able to manage volume, or say a pivot, because hires obviously don't always happen at the perfect time, right? It doesn't always, you don't get to decide when, Joe resigns and gives you 2 weeks notice and you're at year end, and Sally just went on mat leave and Rebecca's on short-term disability. You don't always get the grace of, of it being, something that you get to choose. So having a dedicated process that makes sense, that affords you the ability to look at best fit for that position, like Julianna said, like having really good, a solid understanding of the role, solid understanding of the process, the timelines, and truly having a kickoff call internally with your team if you're doing the hire internally. From what date do we want to hire someone? How long are we willing to run the ad? At what point will we have a short list and go to interviews? Let's get on everyone's calendar so that your team is all bought into this being a successful project. Because a lot of times it's disjointed. We can't get on calendars. Oh, we just lost the top 2 people. Now our managers are upset because the talent wasn't there. Well, it was there, but we didn't plan for success, and we need everyone's buy-in. And I think that actually needs to come from the top. That needs to be something that the executive group recognizes and helps to press the importance of everyone getting on the same page. Because without that, it's just like OH&S or safety. Without that compliance from the top and that culture of really care about who we bring in through these doors, and we really want, because we have unintended consequences of when we make mistakes. And everyone we bring in our doors, like Natasha, like you were saying, we all create an atmosphere in others. Our conduct creates an atmosphere. So let's make sure it's the best one possible. And I think that, not to always talk about policies and process, but like you have to have a great process. You do, because it will set you free. And I mean, Marie, we've talked about that in the past, right? It is so important to have a policy and a process, because then you can move volume quickly under pressure, and you likely will have better results. And then once you've got that, you can really sit into listening, like really, you can sit into really picking up those signals of, okay, these are some big risks. We got to vet those. Doesn't mean they're sure, but they might be. And just to diarize all of that in a way that you can close the file drawer at the end of the day, pick it up quickly, and move it to success. And that's what I would say is really important.
I like the POP. Somebody recently gifted me the POP, the purpose, the outcome, and the process. If you have a desired outcome and you know what your purpose is, you can develop your process to get there. I think it's naive, Julianna, when people consider their hiring practices without considering the overlap between the attraction of a new client in the door to the same attraction of the employee in the door, because they actually come in almost the same way. A new employee will check out that company on social media. That employee will look at the Yelp reviews or the Google reviews, and they will get to know that employer prior to coming in. How do you form that part of the process?
Yeah, exactly. Well, and so with the Great Migration, right, that started this past spring, so lots of people are starting to look carefully at their career choices, and are they getting the work-life balance that they want? Is the work that they're doing filling them with joy, or is it sucking the soul right out of their bodies? And so as more, especially the senior level folks, as they're starting to make these rationalized decisions, what becomes really important from a cultural, and this sort of feeds from recruitment into retention, is what kind of flexibility do you offer? What kind of work environment can you create for that individual that will allow them to operate at their best? And that's gonna require a lot of tailoring. And this is like where Murray's work with the policy and procedure stuff. I mean, you've got to be able to have enough structure and predictability and fairness, let's call it equity, but also balancing individual needs. I don't have children, so I don't have to worry about family care and daycare and homeschooling and all those issues. And friends of mine who also don't have kids work in organizations where the policies very much are favored in the direction of people with kids. And so what are those perceptions? So lots around decision making around policy, I think, is going to happen in the future. But to answer your question, yeah, like what kind of work environment do they have the freedom to work between those core hours, or can they also work outside of core hours? Do they have to be signed in? Do they have to come into the office if there is an office? All of those kinds of things make, well, and their relationship with their director or their manager becomes super important, that they have that relationship. I was on a walk with another friend of mine, an executive in the training. Yeah, I'm doing a lot of walks and talks these days with my friends who are part of the Great Migration. She signed up for a year ago for a not-for-profit organization that's very different than what her background is. And so she's reassessing, and she's not kind of getting the groove with her president. And so she's reevaluating whether or not she should stay and accept and work around it and do some kind of mediated process, or whether she should just go find another job. And she's not going to just jump because the other job might not be as desirable as what she has now. So long answer to, really looking at what is your culture and how are you onboarding new people? How are you engaging them to a sense of belonging to this organization? Do they feel like they fit? Because if you're a family, if I'm the kid that never feels like in my family, like I'm the odd one out the entire time, you're not going to get the same productivity that if somebody who feels safe to speak up.
3 surveys came out in the last week outlining employees' preferences for keeping a hybrid versus going back to the workforce or staying completely remotely. And between 54 to 62%, depending on the survey that you looked at, said they must have choice. What's the best retention tool that you've ever heard of, Stephanie?
I'm going to say it's not a tool. I'm going to say it's trust, and it's autonomy, and it's recognition. And those things can be fostered, through tools. And there's also, the other thing I'm going to say is when you have tools that are meant to support retention, that they are not misused. And I'll give you an example. We, with Lotus Group, we're currently working with a wonderful organization. They span most of Western Canada and way, way up north. They have about 300 employees, and the tool that they use that should be fostering engagement, retention, development, promotion, signaling where individuals are thriving, not thriving, gaps. It's about that tool, and it's been amazing. They have this amazing culture keeper, and she said, this needs to be growth mindset. This has been misused, it's been misplaced, it's been put in the hands of use it punitively. This is not why this is here. And so it was a really amazing project for us to be a part of, because it was about, let's change the dialogue. Let's change this from annual to semi-annual. Why? If you just look at something once a year, like this is truly to move not only for employees, but holding their managers, the executive accountable to support them on their journey. Like, let's look at this from a glass half full as opposed to glass half empty. So I would say that, and not to veer away from the tools, but if the tools can be used in different ways, that there's aligned vision throughout the organization, that they're being used towards enacting the vision and bringing that to fruition. And I think that can keep everyone on that sort of positive. It's like anything, like any really great skill set or personality trait in another light can be a hindrance. And so it's about using everyone's strengths, recognizing that, you know, all tools can show, you know, any index, personality index, we can always look at the negative. There's always a negative. And to recognize that within your organization, there's different ways that people bring revenue, save costs, improve processes, and that then what autonomy you afford them can help them to really streamline and really bring excellence to their position. And for everyone, that can look different depending on the role that they're in and the life that they lead. So I think that it's just about the philosophy behind why we use the tool as opposed to the tool itself is what I would say. I've worked with lots of tools. I don't know all the tools, but I do believe that ones that you can factor in that there is very low risk of discrimination, there's high ability for inclusion and diversity and equity. Those are the tools I would say that are leading the market right now. And there's many.
So what we were talking about before about shortlisting. So I'll only give my managers 3 candidates. Basically what I think is an A, a B, and a C, essentially, right? And then when I do my pre-screening, I talk for quite a long time to begin, 5-10 minutes. And I actually have a cheat sheet for myself just so I make sure I know all the amazing things we do, but I don't want to forget anything. So I have a cheat sheet up and I actually spend 5-10 minutes explaining to the candidates who we are, what we do, what our values are, and why it's such a great place to come work at Park Insurance. I tell them about how we do quarterly employment engagement surveys and what our score is. I tell them about what we did at our past Christmas party or winter party or summer party, what we did. I tell them about the quarterly challenges that we have, what we've done for professional development, what is traditionally a performance review. I talk about our health benefits. I talk about our life work balance. Like I just talk for so long. It's because we hire 100% on fit. I can teach you hard skills. I cannot teach you soft skills. So I interview a little bit on the hard skills because obviously we're an insurance brokerage. You need to have some level before I pass you along. But then I also spend a long time, and Lori knows this too, I've mentioned it before, asking really interesting questions. I tell people, hey, listen, you've never heard these interview questions before. There's no right or wrong answer. Let's just have a lot of fun. So whatever comes to mind. If you could be an animal, which one would you be and why? On a scale of 1 to 10, how weird are you? If I gave you $1,000 to plan a company event, what would it be and why? And so I spend a long time asking them things that would divulge to me whether they would be a fit within our company and in that specific department. And yeah, and then I make sure that that's like, and it aligns, I make sure that it aligns with what's on our social media and what's on our website, so that everyone can see that it's not just a nice speech that we do at the beginning of our interview. It's actually what we live on a day-to-day basis. And then I also wrote that onboarding, I think, is a huge component to the hiring and retention process. I think that, you know, people, employers and employees, they remember their first 2 weeks of employment and their last 2 weeks of employment. Everything in the middle is just gray, right? And so I think for employees coming in, and that, you know, if you put yourself in the employee's shoes, like Lori said, we're working with humans here. There's anxiety, there's stress, like even little things like, is there a microwave? Is there coffee? Is there almond milk or is there only cream? Where do I park? What's the dress attire? What's the washroom situation like? Like little things like that make someone coming in on their first day and their first week and their first 2 weeks, just that anxiety removed. Yeah. And if you can remove that anxiety in those first week jitters, you have a candidate that is so much more confident coming in and they can just hit the ground running in their role.
Julianna, what's the best question that you would like to hear employers ask candidates that you're not hearing?
It's funny. I'm sure that many of you, if not all of you, already asked this, but like, why are you interested in this job? And just an open-ended, like, what attracts you to this? And that right there ferrets out, have they done their research? Have they looked at our website? Have they done some due diligence on their own? Number 2, if they have, what's attractive? Because what's attractive to person A might be very different than what's attractive to person B. And I want to get to not only can they do the job, but will they do the job? And so the motivators, just as much as the competency questions, I want to know what motivates them. Because, for example, if I know that they're hiring into a team that's high paced, high performance, you don't quit until you're done, and they're about work-life balance, they might have all the skill, but they may not appreciate that team and may not flourish. So, oh, that's my alarm. Sorry.
Well, I guess that brings
I
us
have to do an
time.
exercise after we're done. I got to do this every 2 hours. But anyway, so to me, it's really those motivation questions to understand why this, especially when there's a red flag like relocation, or they have to do a 45-minute commute, or, you know, things. I always want to kind of get into the motivators around fit that way.
Stephanie, what's that question that you would like to have employers ask?
Yeah, there's two, and they kind of lead into one another. But we all know how to interview, and anyone can look up tips and tricks. And so I think it's really critical that people bring who they truly are authentically to an interview. And sometimes when you're interviewing a candidate as a company, and you may feel that they're on edge or they're nervous, like Natasha, what you walked us through, I just think, well, your organization is so fortunate to have you. Yeah. Because you wouldn't do that if you didn't truly care about people. Like, that is beautiful, because people are going to get really comfortable and they're going to trust you, and you're going to really truly be able to assess. And that's beautiful. I think that one thing that sometimes we don't do is we're thinking of the job, and I'm the employer, and I've got this job, and I'm, are they as good as the other candidates? We need to start thinking about their experience as an employee in our organization, and recognize that an hour is not enough time for them to adjudicate us as a company. So I would like to typically ask my clients who are interviewing, once they're getting potentially candidates through us or on their own, is that, Joe, before you leave this interview, is there anything that we've not shared with you or we haven't asked you that would be critical for us to know about you to ensure that we can help empower you to access and support your success? Or is there anything that we haven't shared with you that you would need to know to align and to take away tonight or today to reflect on, to make sure that you are making the right move into our organization? Like, to ensure that you recognize that you're not the panacea, and they know that, and they can kind of put the guard down and ask. And then when they do a great job of sharing with us why it is they're so good at their craft, right? Like, maybe they've said, I stand out from my peers because of this. Ask them, where does that come from in you? Where did you develop this? Like, start going down into those roots, because as an employer, let's hope it's consistent and persistent across environments and roles and throughout their entire life, because otherwise it could be a sales pitch. That's really important to be able to go, am I connecting with this? Because you might go, wow, this is really going to connect for our group. Or, wow, I really know which manager is really going to help to foster this person's development because they come from the same roots. Wow, this is like connection. Those would be the questions that I would empower.
Well, my key takeaway from our conversation, which I know could go on because I love chatting about this, is, if you do the process and you put yourself out there in the correct light, and you ask the right questions to bring on and recruit and onboard, that retention will automatically happen. Have I got that correct? I want to thank everybody for coming out today. If you enjoyed it, I would invite you to come back. So if you like it, I hope you come back. But as always, this is the best part of my week, and I really thank every one of you for coming out. We'll see you next time.